It began on what should have been a regular night on television, a popular late-night talk show, a buzzing crowd, bright lights and laughter, and at the center of it all, Denzel Washington, calm, poised, and composed as ever. He walked onto the stage with the familiar grace that had defined his decades-long career. The crowd stood, applauding loudly. The host welcomed him warmly, cracking jokes and playing scenes from his newest film. On the surface, everything was just as it had always been. But behind Denzel's steady smile, there was a quiet stillness. Something behind his eyes seemed distant, like a man with something unresolved, lingering in his heart. Then, midway through the interview, the host leaned forward with a smirk and said, "We've got a little surprise for you tonight. Someone very far away wants to say hello." The audience chuckled. Denzel raised an eyebrow. "What kind of surprise?" he asked, amused. That's when the screens behind the set lit up. A flag appeared, not one most viewers would immediately recognize. It was the flag of Burkina Faso. A hush fell over the studio. Then, a voice came through the speakers, deep, steady, sincere. "Good evening, Mr. Washington. My name is Ibrahim Traore, interim president of Burkina Faso. It is an honor to speak with you tonight." The room fell completely silent. Even Denzel looked frozen. Unsure if what he was hearing was real, the voice continued, "You may not know me, but when I was 14 years old, I watched you in the film Glory. I was just a barefoot boy, sitting in a dusty village, watching a man who looked like me cry out for justice. That night, I told my mother, one day, I will fight for people like that man does." Denzel's mouth opened slightly. He didn't speak, couldn't he? President Traore continued, "When my people called on me to lead, I remembered your face, your voice, your strength. You gave me an example of what it means to rise without fear." Denzel placed his hand over his mouth. The studio remained still. You could hear a pin drop. Then Denzel asked quietly, "You're telling me I helped shape a President?" Traore answered with a calm, certain voice, "No, sir. You helped shape a man." A tear rolled down Denzel's cheek. What followed next stunned everyone in the room. "In our culture," the president said, "when someone changes your life, you honor them. Mr. Washington, I'm formally inviting you to Burkina Faso, but more than that, I want to name our new National Leadership School after you." Gasps rippled through the studio audience. Even the host sat speechless. Denzel shook his head, overwhelmed. "I don't deserve that," he whispered. "That's why you do." President Traore replied. Then, the call ended. The screen went dark. And Denzel Washington, a man known for portraying kings, generals, and icons, lowered his head and cried on live television, not for the applause, not for the moment, but because he had just discovered that his work had crossed oceans, that his art had planted seeds in someone else's soul. What he didn't yet know was that this moment was only the beginning. The very next morning, headlines around the world were flooded with clips from the show. Social media erupted. News anchors called it the most powerful television moment in years. Hashtags trended across continents. But while the world reacted, Denzel quietly packed a bag. No press, no cameras, no fanfare. He booked the earliest flight to Burkina Faso, a small backpack, a passport, and a heart full of emotions he couldn't yet explain. As the plane lifted into the sky, he looked out the window and whispered, "I don't know what I'm walking into, but I know I need to go." Back in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, President Traore stood by a tall window in the presidential residence. An aide approached and asked, "Should we alert the media?" He shook his head. No cameras, no speeches, just truth. When Denzel's plane landed, the sun was already low in the sky. There was no red carpet, no crowd, just a single black SUV parked near the tarmac. And standing beside it was the president himself. No security team, no metal-studded jacket, just a simple linen shirt and calm eyes. Denzel stepped down from the aircraft. Their eyes met. And without saying a word, they embraced, not as actor and president, but as two men connected by a film, a moment, a memory. "I'm honored you came," said the president. "I didn't come as a star," Denzel replied. "I came as a brother." The SUV carried them through winding roads, past children playing soccer with plastic bottles, past open-air markets filled with music, dust, and the scent of grilled corn. They drove until they reached a quiet home, made of clay and tin, weathered by sun and time. "This was my childhood home," the president said. They stepped inside. There was no air conditioning, no bodyguards, just a woven mat. A few photos, a room filled with history. President Traore pulled out an old picture. A young boy, holding the hand of an older woman. She raised me, he said quietly. When my parents worked long hours, she fed me, taught me, protected me. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, she's still alive. Denzel turned to him, still alive, at 85. She cleans classrooms in a school outside the city. She never asked for help. She always said, God gave me legs, I'll use them, until he takes them. They drove again. For nearly 2 hours, neither man spoke much. Denzel stared at the photograph of the woman, her gentle smile, her proud eyes, her weathered hands. Finally, they arrived. A small rural school stood in the heat of the afternoon sun. The walls were chipped, children laughed in the courtyard. Teachers stood under the shade of old trees, and then, she appeared, broom in hand. Shoulders slightly bent, feet bare. It was her, the woman in the photograph, Mama Hawa, the president called out. She looked up, her eyes filled with tears as she saw him. Ibrahim. He rushed to her and wrapped her in his arms, and then she turned. She saw Denzel. She walked slowly toward him, her hands trembling. You're him, she said, her voice breaking. You're the one who made my boy believe. She reached out, her fingers touched his cheek. And in that quiet courtyard, time stood still. A child she had once fed with her last piece of bread had become a president, and the man on the screen who had once inspired that child had come to thank her. 3 souls, 3 journeys, 1 moment. What came next would change everything. Later that evening, Denzel and President Traore sat in silence under the shade of a baobab tree near the school. Beside them, Mama Hawa rested on a bench, her eyes tired but filled with peace. Children still ran barefoot in the courtyard, their laughter echoing across the village. The sun had begun to dip low, casting long shadows over the cracked earth. For a long time, no one said anything, and then, quietly, Mama Hawa began to speak. She told stories about young Ibrahim, how he once cried all night during a storm and clung to her skirt until he fell asleep, how he once gave her the only mango he had because she hadn't eaten, how he would sit by the fire and say, Mama, one day I'll be someone important, and I'll take care of you. Denzel listened without interrupting, his face soft. It was a side of leadership the world rarely saw. The boy before the title, the struggle before the speech. Then, Mama Hawa reached into the pocket of her apron. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded a yellowed piece of paper. I kept this, she said, her voice almost a whisper. The page was brittle and old, written in a child's handwriting. It read, One day I will be a leader, and I will find you, Mama, I promise. President Traore stared at it for a long time, then nodded. I wrote that for her birthday when I was 9. She gave me her only piece of bread that morning. Denzel wiped his eyes. She held on to hope, he said. That's the most powerful kind of faith. Suddenly, a child ran up, barefoot, smiling, and holding a cracked plastic ball. Mama, will you play? And without hesitation, Mama Hawa stood up, handed her broom to the nearest child, and followed the boy into the field, still barefoot, still smiling, still playing. And in that moment, something shifted inside Denzel. He wasn't just visiting a village. He was witnessing a sacred truth, that leadership isn't always loud. It doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes, it holds a broom. Sometimes, it gives away bread. Sometimes, it teaches a boy to stand when the world says sit. Later that night, Denzel and the president returned to the residence. The air was quiet, heavier now, as if something invisible had been left behind in that schoolyard. President Traore broke the silence. I want to show you something. He led Denzel down a hallway that wasn't on any official tour. No guards, no aides, just stone, walls and echoing footsteps. At the end of the corridor, he unlocked a thick wooden door. Inside was a small room, dimly lit, lined with books, old maps, journals, and a single large framed photo. It was of Mama Hawa and young Ibrahim, both laughing, both barefoot. This is my treasure room, the president said. Denzel looked around, not a single medal. President Traore smiled. No, only the things that built me. He picked up a tattered notebook. These are my first dreams for Burkina Faso. Scribbled when I was still sweeping floors with her. Denzel touched the cover gently. You lead like a son who remembers love. I try, Traore replied. Because leadership, if it forgets who gave it a path, becomes something dangerous. They sat in silence again. Two men, one mission. To honor the woman who had raised a leader and who had just, unknowingly, changed the heart of a Hollywood icon. Denzel spoke first. I have an idea, he said, but she'll never expect it. The next morning, the plan was in motion. No press releases, no public announcements, just a quiet caravan of cars heading back toward the village. At the school, teachers lined up, children gathered, curious, excited, not sure what was happening. Mama Hawa stood at the center of the yard, confused. Then President Traore stepped forward and knelt before her. He held a small velvet box. Inside was a medallion gold round, and engraved with her name, and the national seal of Burkina Faso. For your service to this nation, he said, as a mother, teacher, and guardian of hope. The children clapped. Teachers wiped tears. Then Denzel stepped forward. He held an envelope in his hand and said, this morning, I spoke with my producers. Your story will become a film, and every cent it earns will go to building schools in your name. Mama Hawa dropped to her knees. She cried openly, hands over her face, her body trembling. She had spent her life giving. Now the world was giving something back, but the most profound moment had not yet arrived. 3 days later, Denzel returned to Los Angeles. The media tried to swarm him at the airport, but he said nothing. He quietly declined all interviews, except one. A major network had already advertised a live sit-down. Millions were expecting laughs, clips, maybe a few stories from set. But when the host asked Denzel, what's one experience that changed your soul? Denzel paused. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a scarf, worn stitched by hand, faded with time. The host looked confused, and then, without warning, the studio screens lit up. President Traore appeared live from Burkina Faso, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was Mama Hawa, wearing a traditional headwrap, holding a phone, her eyes bright. The audience gasped. Denzel's hand trembled. President Traore spoke first. You honored us with your visit. Now allow us to honor someone you inspired. He turned to Mama Hawa. She raised the phone, looked into the camera, and whispered in broken English, thank you, my son. Denzel wept. So did the host. So did millions watching from around the world. In the next 24 hours, the moment went viral. Donations flooded a student-run GoFundMe meant to rebuild the village school. A simple goal of $10,000 turned into over $1 million. But just as the world was embracing her, Mama Hawa's body began to fade. She had smiled for days, hugged dozens, spoken to presidents and film stars. But now, her body was tired. She asked for one last conversation. In her small home, with no cameras present, she spoke to Denzel and President Traore. I won't see the next planting season, she said softly, but I have no fear. My only wish is that no child in Burkina Faso ever goes to school hungry. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the old scarf. The one Ibrahim had once tied around her arm when he played pretend president. She placed it in his hands. My first medal, she whispered. Then she turned to Denzel. You tell stories that matter. The world listens to you. Tell this one. She closed her eyes with a smile, and then, she was gone. The next morning the village gathered to say goodbye. There was no golden casket, no guards, just flowers, drums, silence. President Traore walked behind her casket alone, carrying only the scarf. Denzel followed in a wrinkled suit, eyes swollen from grief. From all across the world, letters arrived, messages, songs, drawings, from children. One small boy from Niger walked barefoot for 2 days just to leave a note that read, thank you for raising our president. As the casket was lowered into the ground, a bird landed on the grave and didn't move. Then Denzel stepped forward. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a necklace, his father's. He placed it gently on the earth. She reminds me of him, he said, quiet, strong, never asked for anything. That night, President Traore and Denzel sat on a straw mat under the stars. No speeches. Just FIRELIGHT. And memories. Weak, Traore said. I remembered who I am. Denzel nodded slowly. Me too. The next day, the Mama Hawa Foundation was announced, a new effort to provide food, education, and healing to children across Burkina Faso. Denzel donated his full salary from his next film. Quietly, without press. And just before leaving, he recorded a short video. No lights, no studio, just his voice. If one woman in a forgotten village can raise a future president and change the heart of a Hollywood actor, then what are we waiting for? The video reached over 100 million views, and in a quiet corner of Africa, a statue was unveiled, not of a general, not of a king, but of a woman, holding a child's hand at the base, the words, "To Mama Hawa, the mother of all leaders." No one spoke at the ceremony, because some endings are too sacred for words.